We are just 5 days from the start of Media Day and training camp officially starting for the Chicago Bulls on September 29th. So, in today's episode, I want to talk about some optimism going into this season for your Chicago Bulls. It could be a little negative sometimes, but let's focus on the positive on this episode. Before we talk about it, break it all down, you already know you got to hit the music first.
Cognac, gang.
Shy Bulls podcast with the Cognac Boys. I'm Cognac Boy Bobby, and I am holding it down on another daily episode. So if you're tuned in, locked in, ready to talk Bulls basketball as we approach the greatest time of the year, when football is on, when basketball is on, when it start getting cold outside, when it's hoodie weather outside, when it's cold as hell outside, and you spend a lot of time with your family. But hey, if y'all tuned in, man, let's get ready and jump into some optimism surrounding the Chicago Bulls this season, man. Last year had some up and downs. Definitely ended that up. Definitely ended on a up kind of until we got bounced out in the play-in versus the Miami Heat. But this season brings a lot of optimism for me. Not necessarily saying that I'm going to jump off the porch with predictions and say that the Chicago Bulls are going to the Eastern Conference or anything like that. That is not what's about to happen on today's episode. What is going to happen on today's episode is just saying and pointing out some things that we could pay close attention to for this upcoming season to be like, if things go right, maybe the Chicago Bulls can exceed some expectations. The first thing up is the young players to build with. When we talk about these young players to build with, we looking at a lot of young players that kind of fit the mold of the front office and saying, hey, we have young players with experience around the league. So young players to build with, now newly assigned player Josh Giddey is available for the Chicago Bulls for the next 4 years. Coby White, we still trying to figure out his situation, but for this particular season, that brings some optimism. Matas Buzelis, a young fellow who came in and was once touted as the number one overall pick, ultimately slid to the Chicago Bulls at 11. He brings some type of optimism. Obviously, when it comes to Matas Buzelis, we still got to see it be put on wax. We still got to see things be done on the basketball court. But at the end of the day, he provides some optimism, especially because we've seen what he was able to accomplish and do for the second half of last season, and the aggressiveness and the ability to get to the foul line in summer league, even though that is a small sample size, that provides a little bit of optimism when it comes to the young players. Then you look at Noa Essengue. I personally don't anticipate to see him a lot at the start of the season, but depending on his developmental process, we could potentially see Noa Essengue thrive and eventually carve out a role for himself as the season goes on. Then you talk about another young player in Isaac Okoro. I'm interested to see what he can bring to the Chicago Bulls. I'm interested to see who's going to separate themselves with this young core, to see if Dalen Terry is going to stick around a little bit more, to see if Julian Phillips is going to stick around a little bit more for this upcoming season. But the Chicago Bulls have young players in place that they can build with, not necessarily saying that these guys are a de facto championship team at this point in time. Not saying that they are a legit playoff, team at this particular moment in time, but you have some really, really good young players that you can start to set building blocks on or with and start to move in the right direction. Another thing that we could talk about some optimism when it comes to the Chicago Bulls is a potential next step for a couple players on the Chicago Bulls. You already know where we're going with this. Matas Buzelis, Coby White, Josh Giddey. potentially another step for these said players. And maybe somebody may rise from the ashes and say, I'm here, let's rock, let's roll. But for the most part, we looking at guys who could potentially take another step. Josh Giddey did not start off last season really, really well, but came on along really, really well to where he was averaging dang near a triple double. So that's very, very positive for the Chicago Bulls and us as fans to see a player in Josh Giddey potentially enter this season, giving us what we expect him to give us as far as a Chicago Bulls point guard. And we've seen that he's been putting in a lot of work in the offseason. And we've been seeing that now you got some money on, my boy. You should be very, very happy, and you should be good to go and rock out with your Chicago Bulls. Coby White, my man is knocking on all-star selection. Can he overcome that obstacle? We seen him being placed in most improved player talks. We seen Coby White go from starter to bench player to point guard to now off guard and still place himself in conversations like most improved player. Go out there and get himself players of the week. Go out there and get themselves players of the month. What is next for Coby White? Is it an all-star appearance? We shall see. And Matas Buzelis, a lot of us. I'm not ready to go off that on jump off that porch yet and say he is the franchise player, but it appears to be the Chicago Bulls are putting things in motion to where he can go out there and grab the bull by the horn and say, I am now the franchise player. A big year two for Matas Buzelis to go out there and show us what he actually made of. We trying to see if he can be more consistent on the offensive side of the ball, outside of the painted area with the jump shot, with creating his own shot. We're trying to see a little bit more consistency when it comes to the defensive side, when it comes to Matas Buzelis. So another step potentially incoming from three players on the Chicago Bulls. Another thing we should be optimistic about is the supporting cast. Trey Jones, solid point guard, backup point guard for the Chicago Bulls. Definitely proved it this last season with the small stint that he had with us, that he can impress and do a number of things on both ends of the floor. Ayo Dosunmu coming back from injury, saying we thinking about playoffs. Okay, my friend, put it on wax for me. Put it on wax for me. Then you talking about all the wing depth that you have. Isaac Okoro, what you gonna do, my boy? I know a lot of people are down on Patrick Williams, but the standard has been set for him, and they already let him know you disappointed us last year, my boy. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? Kevin Herter, we can't forget about him. Zach Collins, can't forget about him. Young players supporting this young team to see if they can go out there and provide something each and every night. So the supporting cast, though you may not see an absolute star as a supporting guy to come off the bench for the Chicago Bulls, there is some optimism to want to see how this second unit comes together to support the starting five. Another thing of optimism is that, in my personal opinion, this team is now better fit for Coach Billy Donovan. They want to play fast. They want to get up shots. They want to go ahead and attack the basket. I love it. Now we're going to be concerned about the defense a little bit. We're going to see who steps up in that regard. But I believe that this is a better team in the vision of what Billy Donovan wants to do. I think Billy Donovan does a really good job with his young players, more so than having a bunch of veterans around, which sounds a bit crazy in a way. But I think that this team right now is better fitting to the current state of the NBA, to where you need a well balanced out team. You need a good point guard. You need good wing defenders. You need a solid center. Maybe not the best option that we have in Nikola Vucevic, but somebody that can still impact the game. So I'm looking at this as being one of those things, or one of these young teams that fits Billy Donovan the most as it currently stands. I know some people will push back and be like, well, what about the 35 games with Lonzo Ball and the other guys? That's a good point. I'm not gonna hold you, but it's been a while since we've been back up into that level to say, hey, this team fits what Billy Donovan is actually trying to do. So I'm gonna say that and add that in there. And my last thing for optimism, because I don't want to Chicago Bulls, is a questionable Eastern Conference. A questionable Eastern Conference for the Chicago Bulls provide optimism for the Chicago Bulls fandom. It does. Keep it real for a second. Like real for a second. A questionable Eastern Conference provides some type of optimism for the Chicago Bulls because simply, regardless on how you feel that other teams stack up versus the Chicago Bulls, we just don't know how it's all going to shape out by the time February gets here, by the time March, April, we get into the playoffs get here, play-in get here. We don't know how it's going to shape out. We have a few certains, like your Cleveland Cavs. We know they're going to be good. Your New York Knicks, we know they're going to be good. And then we have, hey, these guys may be ready to actually take that step. That's in your Orlando Magics of the world. That's in the Atlanta Hawks, who made a lot of improvements over this offseason. We'll see what that translates into. We'll look at the 76ers and say, hey, if Joel Embiid is healthy, Paul George is healthy, the 76ers can make some noise. But if we all had a fifth, everybody will be drunk. If was a fifth, we'll all be drunk, right? So it's still a questionable conference, and that's not mentioning teams like Indiana with a hell of a head coach and Rick Carlisle. How do they adjust without Tyrese Halliburton? There you looking at the Boston Celtics where they lose Jason Tatum. Yes, you still have Jaylen Brown and Derek White and picked up Anthony Simons, but how is that team going to come together to perform? And will they be back at the top of the Eastern Conference? Still don't necessarily know. Do we know the Boston Celtics will be good? I believe they will. But sometimes when you lose a player like the caliber of a Jason Tatum and you leave, you still have a one guy you can depend on. Sometimes it's not very predictable on how things will go when it comes to regular season games. So the Chicago Bulls, they're in a position to where they can potentially make some noise. They are in a position to where they could potentially exceed some expectations. I think some people have them, at least last time I checked, they have the Chicago Bulls at about 39 wins. I think the Chicago Bulls can exceed those expectations, but it's not on me. It's not on me. It is on the young Chicago Bulls players to go out there and show us what they're actually made of, to go out there and put it on wax and go play sound basketball. Because we've seen teams in Chicago start off slow and then get hot at the end. Me personally, my expectation is hit the ground running. No, I don't expect the Chicago Bulls to just peak early in the season. I want you to gradually peak, but I think it's very important for this young Bulls team to stack wins early. You come out the gate with games against the Knicks, against the Cavs, against the Detroit Pistons, and we can't forget about them on how they might line up and shape up in the Eastern Conference as well. So we got to consider it. The Chicago Bulls can be in some conversations, but at the end of the day, they have to put it on wax. There is optimism. And obviously, it is not guaranteed that they will go out there and exceed expectations. But what provide optimism has been laid out, and it is right in front of us to say, hey, Josh Giddey might actually go out there and put together a consistent season. Coby White might actually be knocking on the door of All-Star. Matas Buzelis might be taking another year, another step forward this season. The supporting cast of Ayo Dosunmu, Trey Jones, you look at Isaac Okoro, you're going to see what Patrick Williams is going to do. We look at Dalen Terry, we look at Julian Phillips, young players who need to separate themselves from one another to see how we can push this thing forward. So there's some optimism. It is not the end all be all, but there is some optimism surrounding the Chicago Bulls, and we are not too far away to see what actually happens. But that is it for me today, y'all. I appreciate y'all for tuning in to another episode. Before you get up out of here, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell as well, man. I appreciate y'all. Make sure y'all always see red, and y'all already know. I'm going to catch y'all on the next one for sure. Peace.
Cognac. Gang.